When we think of space, we naturally think of the stars, solar systems, galaxy, the distant reaches of the universe.
But space has another dimension to explore, not outward, but inward, into all the basic elements of everything there is on our planet.
Here, a miniature world of space exists, a world filled with constant motion, one that went undetected for centuries. It is the world of the atom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Free Radical Media Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about nature. Our guest today is Dan DeLion of ReturnToNature.us. He's a herbalist, forager, naturalist, and activist and educator. So Dan, why don't you tell us a little bit about kind of how you got started and what it is you do?
Hey, so I guess it just all started when I started going outside and I just let my intuition guide me, and I guess I just started realizing how much of a profound intuitive practice it can be to sort of learn about plants or start identifying mushrooms, and then one thing led to the next, and now I'm chasing after foxes and looking for bald eagles and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that sounds that sounds fantastic, really. I think this is such an interesting topic because, I mean, obviously, ecology is, it's real at the forefront of everybody's mind now. I think, just because of the kind of problems we're having ecologically. Something that you do is you educate people on how to survive. You educate people about foraging, and herbalism and herbal medicine, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that stuff?
So cool, yeah, that just seems to be, I don't know, maybe the best solution I can come up with as a somewhat activist is, well, if we can get people to realize that there's medicinal plants and foods in people's backyards, and that essentially all the things that we're mowing and spraying with chemicals are foods and medicines that mostly our ancestors have brought here, then that maybe could be a pretty decent paradigm shift.
Yeah.
So I think it all kind of stems from the realization that, wait, dandelions are one of the most profound medicinal plants on the planet, and every other culture that doesn't have them knows that. And so basically every plant is a weed somewhere else. Someone's screaming about the tomatoes somewhere.
Yeah. Right. That distinction has always been odd to me. We kind of seem to arbitrarily pick plants that we want to see in our environment, and then we name everything else weeds.
Yeah.
Like what's I don't know, I've never understood what the point of that was. It seems arbitrary to me.
Yeah, well, Ralph Waldo Emerson, I believe it was, he said, a weed is a plant whose virtues are yet to be understood. And I question, basically my line of work is to question, where does this idea even come from? Where did that idea to target plants as weeds even come from? So it's a really interesting mystery, I think, and I definitely haven't really figured it out entirely, but after, 6 or 7 years of teaching, I'm getting some feedback, definitely, and, albeit it's not always pleasant insight.
Yeah, sure. I think that it goes further than weeds and ornamental plants. You know, I was just reading something today in Adbusters where they were talking about how somewhere along the line we decided that we as humans in our society was different from nature with a big N. You know, like
Yeah.
nature is something other. You know, it's something to be
Yes.
protected or exploited, and I don't think that's
Yes.
true.
Well, it's a big epistemological error, and that's really the foundation of where everything comes from, is the idea we basically sought out to understand, well, what is nature and how does nature act? And in that, we kind of came to the conclusion that, oh, well, nature acts like the lion eating the gazelle. And so, therefore, that's what nature is. And so, we've built a complete epistemology based on uh, one aspect of what Darwin taught. And it turns out actually that that idea was actually incredibly promoted by Karl Marx, who wrote the Communist Manifesto. So I find it to be very interesting that his competing theory really won out amongst many because of his political backers. I don't know if that sounds familiar to anyone out there.
Of course,
Oh, absolutely. That has been talked about a few times actually amongst us.
absolutely.
The idea how the nature being bloody in tooth and claw has influenced this insane capitalistic consumeristic society we're all a part of, and it's not
Yeah.
even based on the truth of the matter. It's based on a very naive perspective.
So, along with that really comes the next level of understanding, or the next level of my insight to bring to the table, which is, wait a minute, there are other relationships that you can have with your idea of what nature is. And so, of course, now what's really coming to light is how bacteria move and interact with the ecosystem. And the idea and the concept of symbiotic relationships is now just starting to come to light when people are studying mycelial relationships with trees and understanding a whole sharing of nutrients within the forest. So there definitely are other possible ways of explaining what is nature, and we're desperate for a new one. It's obvious.
Definitely. Yeah, we were actually just talking about how you have certain bacterias on your body that live there naturally, and now you have all these antibacterial soaps and washes and stuff, and it's killing a lot of those, and it's actually causing people to lose their natural bacteria that they have, on their bodies because of these types of soaps and shampoos and things like that.
Well, this is another war on, say, nature, or the really comes down to war on the other. And so basically the unknown becomes the other, and the other becomes targeted. We've called it lots of things. We have a whole cultural paradigm of targeting the other. And so bacteria or germs, and I think germ theory is another pinpoint of how that came about, and really understanding that germ theory is another epistemological error, which says that if you kill germs, you'll somehow be healthier. But it's really interesting how we really haven't succeeded at all, and we've killed a lot of bugs,
Yeah.
No, yeah, absolutely. If anything, it seems to be making people more unhealthy.
Yes, well, that's the science now. Luckily, things like the Human Microbiome Project is out there. They're mapping the bacterial cultures of the body, and I find it to be incredibly profound. And I think, so basically what they found recently is that serotonin is largely secreted in the gut by bacteria, and whether or not that's kind of part of their eating process is basically bacteria poop serotonin, which is pretty profound to think about.
Yeah.
But it's a byproduct of their processing in our bodies. And so I think it's 70 to 80% of serotonin in the human body comes from the gut, which is linked to bacteria. And so now you have an idea that, wait, so mood and happiness and peace in the human being is affected by bacterial colonies within the stomach,
That is interesting, especially when you think about like an antibiotic, things that people take when they're sick, and how they can mess up the bacteria systems in your digestive tract, in your intestines. And it's interesting the correlation that then has of killing that bacteria, and then in reality, if that is what's happening, then you're almost kind of ruining your your balance as far as your mood and things of that are concerned.
And your chance of survival as a species. We forget that bacteria are our ancestors, and they've basically built our whole immune function. And so we basically start from bacteria, and everything proliferates from there. So it's kind of like, sawing the limb you're sitting on. We know the same is true for bugs. I mean, think about how in the 80s we all had zappers, bug zappers.
Yeah.
And whoops, I mean, that probably wasn't very good for the bird populations or the turtle populations or the frog populations or whoever else eats bugs. Definitely not so good for the bees and the pollinators. So now we have this, whoops, what do we do about the pollinators kind of mentality? And it really all has to do with the fact that we have this problem thinking that we need to go around micromanaging nature. And in turn, it really probably is much more the other way, is we need to sort of surround wild Neanderthals who talk too much.
Yeah, this is true. We seem to decide to fix the problem before ever actually asking the question of what the real problem actually is. That's
why I propose we vote for 5-year-old children, because they have very sharp insights, and they would say, hey, wait, don't cut down all the trees. I need that for breathing.
Right.
This is true.
Right. That's a conversation I had recently, too, about how children are, they're a blank slate. There's no inhibition there. There's no, they really get at the heart of the matter better than we do sometimes.
Their hearts are still open. And it's funny, because I teach wild plants, and I teach people basically to eat wild plants and to identify them for food, and so they have the whole interaction of putting the nature inside of their bodies. And I find it to be amazing that you don't hear a lot of stories of kids poisoning themselves, and most of the poisonings actually come from adults who have their head on too hard and are thinking, I know what I'm doing. And it's not really as much children going out in their backyards. That one time you did that thing. I rarely hear those stories, which I was very surprised about.
Yeah, that is interesting. That's real interesting.
It seems...
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, perhaps that means that it's an instinctual aspect to ourselves that we actually get diseducated from.
I mean, I think you're right, and I think it's because of, this whole indoctrination, like you said, of the other, we're part of this human society, we should stick to that, and nature is something outside of us, and it seems like we try to dominate it as much as possible. You go to the suburbs, and it's just... manicured lawns that are artificially green, the landscaping's all perfect, mulch lines, it's almost surreal if you notice it.
It's very insecure. It's extremely insecure, and we have to ask why and how did it get like that. And what we have as the alternative is the fact that food can be growing for free very easily, lots of it. And it just really is the choice of concrete, which doesn't sequester carbon very well, or plant and biomass, which sequesters carbon very well, which keeps the planet's temperature sane.
Yeah,
it's true.
Right.
Yeah, you think all around the world, they talk about food shortages and that, and you think, you look at your backyard, how much yard do you need? You have a little garden that, if you have a family of 4, it doesn't take a large gardening space to be able to sustain a family of 4 and grow various herbs and things like that.
Or at least put a dent on the bill. And I think that's really what we have to learn again. That's really the homesteader's resilience. We are completely on a very thin thread, and I frankly find it to be extremely dangerous. It's not very strong of a thread to be on, and especially we're in a position where if we think nature is an accessory that some people like and other people don't have to, then we really need to fundamentally ask the question, what are we doing here? Because if we're not breathing oxygen, the game's over, and that's nature,
Oh, definitely. Yeah, you need oxygen to live.
Yeah, but I find that now that's almost becoming more of a revelation. It's almost it's become like a sacred, holy realization to realize that oxygen is being excreted out of plants, and we're breathing it in, and we're excreting carbon monoxide to them, and so it's an incredible, intimate process. So I guess then it brings me to the question of who has asked these questions and who's really looking at this. And if you see all these philosophers, they were kind of nature mystics or natural mystics, or people who really felt the deep symbiosis of the earth with everything else around it.
Yeah.
It's funny too, because like I know, like even like 10 years ago or so, people would look at herbalists or people that were into sort of natural lifestyles or whatever, and they would say, oh, they're primitive, or they live a primitivist lifestyle. But it's almost like a lot of these types, and myself included, it's almost as if that we're on the forefront of scientific understanding, because science is now just waking up to this fact that it is symbiosis, that really nature is unfathomably complex and orchestrated. And if we understand those rhythms and that ebb and flow, we could align ourselves with it and live a much more I don't know how you would want to say it, adequate, sane. That's a good word.
Yeah, well, that's the question, is how do we define sanity, and how do we define, I hate the word resources, but really understanding nature as more than just an exploitive resource. It's a home. It's not just, you can't just treat your house necessarily as a thing, or else it doesn't really help you out.
Right. And it seems to me that, our problems all stem from the fact that, the natural world exists in this living, vibrant, beautiful system. It's completely decentralized, and it functions like clockwork, and we've removed ourselves from that. We've pulled ourselves away from that and stated that we're separate and that we know best. Rather than plugging ourselves into that system and allowing ourselves to be a part of it, which seems like a far more reasonable course.
And will be the ultimate path of the human if the human chooses to stay on this planet. It's inevitable. It's actually funny, because that's what all the indigenous people around the world realized, and so we call them primitive, which means less intelligent than us. But primitive also means just first. And, the grandparents usually end up knowing best when arguing with the 13-year-old kid who thinks they know everything. And I think this is a case where, unfortunately, what we've just done is removed most of the people on this population who know how to live in balance with the ecosystem. So, another part of my hope and my dream and my vision in my work is to start filming these people and to start bringing some of this indigenous wisdom back into our modern lives. And so when I'm talking about doing classes, some of them are of this ancient wisdom that really is just hanging on by a thread. And so, of course, going out in your backyard and understanding which herbs are there, or learning how to turn cordage and making, sewing your shirt or whatever it is, these are all part of ancient practices which really stem from a self-reliant and self-aware and self-sane paradigm.
This is true. Yeah, we were talking earlier about Chinese herbology and South American herbology, and how both cultures have this just incredible understanding for all the different plants that are around them, all the different uses that these plants have, how essentially they have a plant for any type of disease that they could be facing. And it's very, we're destroying the rainforest, and we have such a disconnect from that there's a good chance that we may end up wiping out a plant that could do a lot of good for us. And
we're doing that. We're doing that every single day in a large scale. It's just a matter of understanding if that's okay with everyone. we're definitely wiping out species all over the place, including plant species. Don't forget that every plant is fighting bacteria, viruses, and fungus. That's why it has chemistry. So when you're consuming it, it's going to do the same thing in you, because cells don't have a sense of duality. The human mind is really the only one here with the sense of duality or separation.
This is true. Yeah, I mean that's the reason why you take an herb, because it directly fights whatever it is that herb specifically fights, whatever it may be, and they don't.
And that compound is already in the atmosphere, and that virus exists in the ecology, and so does the bacteria that harms your body. And really what it comes down to is that there's a disturbance of ecology, and your body has the same reflected ecology as the soil does. And most of bacterial and viral trading of position, and they've been basically doing chemistry for several million years before modern humans got their hands on some gadgets.
This is true. Yeah.
And kind of continuing down that line of thought, what, in your opinion, is the relationship between the biosphere and the technosphere? Because I know a lot of people that are sort of into herbalism or going back to like a more archaic type of lifestyle or whatever. But there's a few in that sort of group that think that all technology is bad and we should do away with all of it and pull the plug on all of it. And then there's others that sort of say, well, not so fast, that we could use technology. We could sort of alchemically like interfuse technology with the biosphere. And I wonder what your perspective is on that.
Well, I believe that nature is still present. I don't think that nature or the sentient entity of nature is not also calling the shots with technology. And so, for me, it's like you develop a knife, and you could either kill someone with it or you can save a life with it. So it really has no sense of morality. The moral comes from us. And so, learning how to obviously biomimic technology into the ecosystem so that we cause little harm to the environment as possible is definitely something we need to really clearly understand. And those technologies seem to be already there. It's just a matter of harnessing them or getting them released to us. But I don't think technology is any different if you look at a Clovis point from primitive people who are flint knapping. That's their level of technology, and they would never have said, oh, we don't need this technology, that's their lifeblood. So again, we're having this conversation in working with technology, but there's a question of where does ethics come from and where does morality come from? And if we can just understand how do we define our relationship with the material world in a way that's harmonious for not only us, but also the material world, then we probably can find a decent balance with the technological revolution that we find ourselves in.
Yeah, I agree. You made the reference to the knife, and it made me think of technology in the sense of the difference between a GMO product and, say, using a hydroponic or an aeroponic system to deal with food shortages and things like that. Obviously, growing the natural seed in an environment that takes out some of the environmental issues that we're dealing with right now is a better way than just pumping a bunch of foreign DNA into a plant to try and make it grow longer, deal with colder climates, and not really know what that's actually doing to how our bodies are breaking down those plants.
Yeah, unless we can all choose that we're going to try that experiment together, and that's what democracy is supposed to mean. And so we are building a democratic technology, essentially, but it's going to take a long time for us all to get privy to the power in our fingertips. But eventually, hopefully, we'll realize, like, wow, we can just vote that collectively. You may have the image in your head. I know I do of like in the Roman times, they show you like, oh, this is the birth of democracy. They're moving stones. The whole town comes and they put stones in one barrel or the other barrel.
Yeah.
And that's how democratic voting occurred. Well, we have that technology now at our fingertips in mass. We just have to figure out how to get that power, and we have to train people to understand what sword they're yielding,
This is true.
Yeah, I agree. And you were talking about morality. It's, if we're the arbiters of morality in our world, we haven't done a very good job by each other in a lot of ways. Especially, when it comes to basic things like providing a meal and shelter for everyone. We don't do a very good job of that. And even democratic institutions haven't done a very good job of that. And I think a lot of it is this society of consumption that we have, where we look at everything as a resource to be consumed, and that, those resources aren't allocated in a moral way. They're not allocated in a equitable manner. We just consume and destroy. We're not replenishing anything.
Yeah, and I'd just add to that we've never seen democracy in our lives.
You're right.
What we get called democracy is capitalism, and there's a big difference. I don't know why we go around turning, these other countries towards democracy in our eyes, but it's actually more towards a network of capitalism. Even the way we vote, I believe it's actually called a representative republic, which means you vote for a representative who represents you, and they count the representatives' votes. That's not a democracy. A democracy means that everyone has a vote and they all get counted. There are no exceptions. That's what democracy is.
Right. I'm glad you brought that up, because a lot of people don't understand the fine difference between democracy and small r republicanism, and we're not talking about the United States political parties. We're talking about the ideas themselves.
Right. And there is a huge disconnect between what we're seeing and the original ideas.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It kind of makes me think of, I want to get your opinion on the idea, a lot of people talk about overpopulation and that the Earth is not capable of supporting the level of human life that we have on it now. My argument is that the Earth is capable of doing so. It's just that the resources are being abused to such a way that it's rendering it impossible. That is, if we were sane and reasonable about how we allocated these resources in our land and our natural wealth, that we could support, the level of population that we have now. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think this is a really good, point for argument and question. And I guess my easy answer is, I don't really know. But in order to do anything, we need to start returning to nature, in the sense that we need to start managing how much resources we use. And either some people are about to crash into the wall as we kind of try to wean ourselves off of this giant thing, or we'll all go together. And I guess that's why we're alive right now. We're trying to determine, wait a minute, do you guys want to come along here? We got this vision and this idea, or no, you're going to stay over there? Okay, so I think really the question is, if people were going to choose to use resources, then I think it's fair to say that they have to figure out how they're going to sequester them. So, for example, like if people want to eat food, we can't rely on, I think it's less than 2% of the United States population, which is growing all the food for the other 98%. I think people need to really start to realize that, food, time is money, right? And food is also money. And so even if you're doing microculture gardening in your windowsill, you're at least creating some sort of self-resilience. We see that there are many rooftops in many cities with no vegetables growing on it. I think another great idea is, why aren't supermarkets growing vegetables on their rooftops?
That's a good.
You know.
That's a fantastic idea. I mean, that seems so reasonable to me. That's.
I know how, but that's the weird thing. How could it not be? Like I could have gotten that idea from a 3-year-old kid.
Yeah.
You know, and I don't even mean that derogatory. Like, and it's just like, how are we not thinking this way? So this gets me a little concerned because that's a very easy thing to pull off with the resources we do have. I think.
You know, I think so too. And you know, we talk about activism all the time here, and you know, I mean, this is something anybody can do right now. I mean, you can go to your backyard and you can start experimenting with permaculture in your backyard right now.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, this is something that's, you know, fairly easy for anyone to start doing. I mean, I think it's a great idea, you know.
You know, sometimes what I have to do in this crazy world is I just have to put a pot of dirt outside and I just invoke plants into it with happy thankfulness, and the plants get left alone because they're in a garden pot. But basically everything that would grow in there, which maybe some people would call weeds, about 98% of it is going to be medicinal, and the other percent of it may be food. There are very few weeds that grow that are actually poisonous, despite what we hear. There's about 5 to 8 plants that I can think of in somebody's backyard that are very easy to identify. So it's really not a matter of, see, what we have is we then take our same perceptual eyes and we superimpose it into another modality like permaculture or like gardening or farming, and we're still doing this idea of we need to micromanage the ecosystem. Like, what I'm proposing is you can be way more lazy about it. You just have to get used to different flavors in your diet, and what it turns out that those different flavors equal more health. So the more intense a bitter green is, that intensity translates to more medicinal effect in the body. So really it has to do with, you know, do you want to subsist on corn, you know, corn and soybeans and wheat, and is that food? And that's where I think Monsanto's argument is honest. They're saying there's not ever going to be enough soy, corn, wheat, and sugarcane on this planet to feed everyone. We need diversity, you know, and that's going to be eating dandelions from our backyards like all of our ancestors have done since time immemorial, you know.
Yeah. I understand where you're going with that, and that's interesting. You know, it's almost like, you know, your body isn't a physical geographical location, and you're just consuming the things that grow naturally around you, you know, that would just grow anyway, regardless of your interference. You know, I guess that's a better way of keeping your body in tune with your surroundings, right?
Plus your surroundings in tune with your desires of being a human being, you know. So instead of going into a pristine place and destroying it, you can actually get to a point where you're potentially benefiting it. And so what it seems like is we only have this sort of Dutch or German tradition of farming, which is intensive agriculture, which really births from biodynamics in a large way. Before Rudolf Steiner, there was an intensive animal husbandry cultivation process, but we have to understand they were relying on monocultures. They were growing large fields of either buckwheat or grain or rye or something like that. And now, granted, it was not the nasty wheat that people are eating these days, but it still wasn't necessarily a polyculture, which is a permaculture term, which means, you know, many plants benefiting each other. We could get scientific with it. We can say which plants here raise nitrogen levels for this plant to eat that nitrogen, and what about this potassium? And we could really build culture. You know, that's the thing. We could build soil culture, but the funny thing I've realized is that nature's already doing that. And everywhere you look that gets left alone is a polyculture.
This is true. Yeah, I was reading an article in the Times, and it was talking about how, you know, when a lot of people they get their lawns sprayed with chemicals and that, and they were saying that a lot of lawns suffer from nitrogen deficiency. And the ironic thing is that the vast majority of lawns will have clover in it, and clover actually puts nitrogen back in the soil for the grass. So yeah, you have these different substances, well, different plants, I should say, that they act together as one cohesive ecosystem. Which, I mean, isn't that, an ecosystem is a sustaining system that is able to essentially take care of itself.
And isn't that the bonehead message from nature to us? You can't do it alone. You can't do it alone.
Yeah.
You can't do it alone. You need a village. You need a community. You need an ecosystem. You need variation. You need diversity. You need culture. Like, we're getting it from every level, and we're still trying to force this individual, the individual grass or the individual wheat or the individual ego or the sports star or the movie star, the hero. And really what it comes down to is that it's just much more fun to like dance around a fire together and be happy and drink some wild mead or something like that.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Sure.
True.
And it's nature's way of telling us how to build our own society too, in a lot of ways, I think. Interdependence, diversity, because as we've been talking about, nature, it seems like if there's a problem in the natural world, there's a plant that'll come in and solve it. The clover, the grass, the nitrogen, right? So that interdependence, it's just such a beautiful thing to me, that's decentralized network of living things. And I think you could structure a society on that as well.
Well, that's what I would basically call the symbiotic paradigm or something. I mean, we need to start understanding that competing with survival of the fittest is, if you understand bacterial life, they're definitely gene sharing as much as possible. A new generation of bacteria is 20 minutes, and within that, if you expose them to one antibiotic, they start building resistance and gene sharing to have resistance to multiple antibiotics they never have even encountered in the environment. So like, that's a cultural model where sharing and understanding how to culturally benefit each other is a really important step. And the funny thing is, it's not in the savannah of Africa where the lion is eating the gazelle. It's in science. It's in the microscope. It's in the tools we've built to perceive deeper the nature of reality. And there it is. It's saying symbiosis wins. That's always the case. Genetic diversity wins. Cultural diversity wins. Having different opinions honored and respected wins. No monoculture has ever existed for a long period of time, ever. No monarchy has lived. Nobody is left from any of that ego game, but the bacteria are hanging out, and they're in this for the long haul. And so maybe we should start modeling our cultural perception, which is a metaphor, towards understanding how bacteria are interacting and what they're doing and what's going on those levels.
Wow.
Yeah.
A lot of implications with that idea.
Right. Yeah.
I wanted to go down a different sort of line of thought, but sort of related to what you're just saying. When it comes to medicinal systems, like, for example, the traditional Chinese medicine, do you believe in sort of following their context in how you mix herbs or how you diagnose an illness? Or do you sort of believe in mixing Chinese herbalism with, say, Amazonian herbalism and sort of mixing and matching? Because I do know, like, in Chinese medicine, different herbs, for example, are more yang and certain herbs are more yin. And if you're taking yin herbs, although they may be very beneficial for you, and you have a sort of yin environment in your body, it could be detrimental, right?
Yeah. But what that is it's got a fundamental principle under that, which is constitutional perception. And so maybe we can call that like perceptual alchemy or something like that, where it's not that we want to say, I practice TCM and are you more yin or more yang, but if we can try to label the energetic principles that we can perceive that aren't intellectual principles, then we end up with constitutional models. We all can perceive this very easily. Just take some cayenne powder and stick your finger up your nose. It's hot, and it's going to be hot in every culture. and that means it's going to be heating to the body, and that means it's hot. And so we all have these base sensations. We know things are cool and things are hot and things are pungent and things are astringent and things are sweet and things are sour. And these are all aspects of our taste buds, which when we really tune up again, we start to build not the intellectual model we can call Ayurveda or TCM or South American herbalism, but we try to get to the source of where they were coming from, which is instinct and intuition. And then we don't have to limit ourselves to exotic products, and exoticism, even though those principles can be extremely helpful as herbalists. So I definitely work a lot with Ayurveda and constitutional models aligned with Ayurveda, but at the same time, I don't want to only know Ayurvedic herbs in that way. I want to understand what's principally under this, and can I learn to perceive it myself?
So what are your thoughts then on, say, importing a specific herb from China or importing an herb from the Amazon? Do you think
it'll be fun for a while?
Yeah. I mean, based on the fact that the environment is so in tune with itself, do you feel that the environment, if there's a specific herb, we'll say, from China that deals with diarrhea for the sake of whatever, and there's no plants nearby in your environment that have the same effect as that, would you?
See, I would almost always challenge that idea, and I would suggest that there's really only several cellular actions, and each plant is designed to create very similar cellular actions. So we do have heroes among the plant world. Turmeric, a great example. It's just got some serious power, but is also an easily growable plant in your backyard, but not enough to get 10 pounds down your gullet a year. So it's really the question of how much can we take from this source, how much can we grow ourselves, where is this coming from, and what are some of the other beings I can work with who will help with those actions. But really the actions, the cell, I try as an herbalist to understand what are the cellular actions that are required. So if you can get an intuitive sense of that, then even when you can consume a wild plant that you're maybe meeting for the first time, you can see and perceive in your mouth, oh, this is drying. This will be good for conditions that I'm trying to dry. So that means every excretion possible in the human body would respond to a drying or an astringent herb. These are general principles that are potentially, maybe we can call them alchemical underlying foundations, which every tradition has risen out of based on who was in their backyard. So, we can import, we can export, that's all fun, but I don't think that can really last. And just the last part on that is there is something called an herbal analog, which is that a plant of the same genus or sometimes the same family can share some of the similar properties. And it's weird because a lot of times we don't know. So astragalus is a great example of this. Chinese astragalus comes from China, and we import it in. But there are many astragalus species in America that no one really works with or really has any idea about. So we don't really have the science there. And what it really ends up being is the fact that in China, they just do herbal studying and they do herbal chemical analysis, and they spend money to do the right research, where we came to a tradition of native people and we kind of destroyed their oral traditions, and then we tried to repair that, and so it's patched up and it's got a lot of holes. But I suspect that it was basically very similar in constitutional medicine and understanding intuitively.
No, definitely, and that. I guess that's sort of the question I wanted to ask you as a person who, is teaching people how to forage, how to use different types of plants and that. Would you say that in every, well, not, I guess Siberia and Antarctica might be slightly different, but in almost every condition, would you say that there are enough plants and herbs and weeds and what have you that are growing around you that could take care of 95% of your needs?
I would say that if it wasn't once the case, people would have never stopped moving. They would have never even been there. If we were traveling and we didn't find the allies that we need, we would have kept moving. So at one point, our ecosystem was so lush that everyone everywhere had what they needed. Along with that are the issues of our modern society, which now, dropping nuclear bombs and stuff, that gives a whole new spin on what we need as far as detoxification and healing. But also, I think that every good herbalist knows it's not just about taking something to fix a problem. It's about understanding really and tracking your cause of your dis-ease. And so herbs really are not there to hide the pain. They're not there to take away the boogeyman. They're there to just take the edge off so that you have time and you have capacity to really start changing the patterns that create the illness. We forget that, we get ill, but then we act like we're victims to it, and we often forget that, well, I did that thing, the last 6 years, and I know my gut was telling me not to do it, but I did it anyway, and now I'm sick. The body has an excellent way of giving the messages in a more and more subtle way. And I think that's really our process as humans, is to try to understand what is the most subtle reaction my body can have. Not what is the most exaggerated explosion that my body can have to tell me I'm not doing well, but so tiredness is one of those experiences where the body's saying, I'm tired, you need to rest because I need to really boost the immune system, I need to fix something. And so, we'll just drink coffee or something and Red Bull and go on with it. Those are the foundational practices that cause illness in the first place. And without fixing those, no herb thrown on top of a burning fire is going to really do it. Although they can do amazing, miraculous things, and I've seen it with my own experience,
Definitely. It's a very shamanic way of looking at it.
And go kind of continuing down that, like I know in shamanism, for example, a lot of times particular herbs sort of need to be, I guess the word would be like cured, or like in shamanic language, the spirit of that plant sort of needs to be evoked to get the full potential of that specimen. And I'm sort of wondering what your take is on that.
Well, that's where I like working with the wild plants, because that's the experiment. And I don't know rationally, but I know instinctually that there's much better chance of creating a cellular energetic harmony with a being that I honor and I respect than one that I just rip out of the ground and use to fix my brokenness. I've never had a good interaction with a human that tried to use me to fix their brokenness. So it's really just, again, common sense. And so, making a relation with certain plants, I believe, definitely will increase their capacity to work with you. It's a two-way street, and we definitely can get into symbiotic relationship with certain allies, certain plant beings. And of course, one of the famous quotes I heard from Susan Weed is, if the plant tells you and it's not in the book, the plant is right. And also there's plenty of stories about how shamans would work with very few herbs, but ask them through their good relationship to do things that they weren't generally known to do. And sometimes they may say, yeah, I can help you. And sometimes they may say, no, you might have to ask my cousin, the other plant down the street, or, this person's meant to die. And that's the problem. We are in a really fix the broken kind of medical paradigm, which is really should be the last situation. We really need to be getting to the point of right livelihood, meditation, make sure we're breathing, eat the right foods, poop when you need to, pee when you need to. America as a whole is not even there yet.
Yeah. Yeah, most certainly. It seems like, especially in the West and America, we just dump things into our bodies without thinking about it. And it's true that what you put into your body is what you're going to get out of it. I mean, what you put in your body defines how your body is going to react in the world.
You are what you eat.
Right. Yeah.
We got told that. How literally did it? We didn't even realize how literal it was.
Do you really want to be McDonald's?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was proven too when that guy did that documentary. I mean,
Super Size Me. Yeah,
Yeah.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks to him, he did a whole series on all different versions of, what was it, for 30 days or something? He went to all these places. It was very insightful.
Yeah, Morgan Spurlock was his name.
There you go.
Documentarian. Yeah.
Yeah, great stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, I like that idea of a spiritual, instinctual relationship with nature, because I feel like we've lost that sensibility too. We have this kind of cult of rationality, I think, that hasn't really taken us. I think it's taken us as far as it can take us.
Yes.
And I think we really need to find that balance again, where we're bringing our instincts and our intuition back to the forefront of our consciousness.
And that's where I think ethic really comes from, is instinct and intuition. And it's not really a rational thing. It's not, it's more rational to chop down both of those trees to make an extra $5. But your instinct is just saying, don't do it, stupid. And if we didn't override that every time, I truly believe that that's where the balance, that's where the ecology respect comes from, is the instinct and the intuition. So really the question, that's why I call what I'm doing as return to nature. It's really returning to that nature sense. Reminds me, John Young, a great influence, he said, what's natural in us is nature. And that's so true. And our senses are nature, and our capacity to have our heart beating as we talk is nature. It's not somewhere else. It's not something else. It's just really about embracing it as it is, instead of trying to manipulate it into, being on our ego's terms or our mind's terms. And under that comes a direct realization. And that is what, maybe is called spirituality, or maybe is called mysticism. But the more I get through all this, it's just common sense. Once you can feel that chopping down a tree destroys your grandchildren, and if you do it too many times, you can really damage a lot of stuff, then it just becomes self-evident. But, how do we inspire people to get that feeling, that gut feeling back? And that really comes with empowerment.
this is true. There's definitely a disconnect there. Whether it be from the capitalist mindset that we're in or not, but the one thing that's interesting is when you look at a lot of societies who have thrived throughout history, spirituality, philosophy, and technology have always been in balance with each other. And it seems in the Western world, we are technology driven, and philosophies have went into such extremes, and spirituality is put into either a nice neat box, or anything that doesn't fit into that box gets disassociated from spirituality. So it's this we're very out of balance. And I feel that these issues that we're having with climate change is only speaking to how out of balance we are as a species existing inside of all of nature.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. I think we would be remiss if we didn't talk about climate change in the context of this interview.
This is true, yeah.
I'm not sure what any of us could say that hasn't been said before. I mean, it's kind of it's a scary topic. But would you like to speak just generally about your opinions on climate change, how you feel about it, what you think can be done?
Well, one thing I'll add is I was just listening that geologists are debating as to when this new epoch starts, which is called the Anthropocene, which is, anthropocentric means, human-centered. And it basically, they're debating whether it was, the Industrial Revolution, whether it was the dropping of the atom bomb, or whether it was, the start of agricultural farming. But definitely, I know that what's happened is we are really kind of calling the shots in a big way right now on the planet. And if we don't shape up and really realize how big the sword is that we wield, we definitely will cause unrepairable devastation. And I think most of the planet feels that right now, but the problem is no one really has any decent solutions, as far as I can see. And most people are running around stressed and crazy. And that's like when the Titanic is sinking, it's not the time to start freaking out. That's the time to put our best foot forward and figure out, all right, who's got the good ideas here? What are we going to do about this? And so, what I like to do is kind of skirt around those names, because what I find is we get lost in semantics. Is it global warming? Is it climate change? Well, it's not cold. It's not cold. Is it getting colder? Is it getting hotter? Like, those are not the important issues as much as what are we going to do right now to make intelligent choices for the fact that how many species are being eradicated off the planet each year? And that's a real thing, and that doesn't take a brain, like a climate scientist to tell you that that's probably not the best thing you want to be doing, especially because, generally people eat, animals, or they eat vegetables, and the earth needs to be able to sustain those things. So I think it's just a matter of really trying to understand if there's climate change or global warming, we're definitely hastening up some damage on the ecosystem, and it really is probably in our best interest, especially for our grandchildren, to really reconsider those choices and to try to figure out, how we can repair some of the damage we're doing. And I think everyone can kind of get on that page, except for maybe just a couple of our friends at the top or something.
Right, because like going back to your Titanic metaphor, it feels to me that not only, I mean, some of these people aren't panicking, they're standing on the deck debating whether or not there's a hole in the boat still.
Yeah,
And
or it's more complicated, and they're doing that just to distract us, and they put the hole there, and that's also possible. And I don't really, anything's game at this point. I mean, how could no one figure this out yet?
it feels to me like a lot of these people are still trying to make a buck. I mean, they think there's still time to make a few, shekels
Yeah,
before the train derails, which is insane to me. I find that to be completely insane, but I don't put anything past the capitalist class anymore.
I think though, if I really was pulling some things, I would probably get you to think that I was just nuts and I just wanted money.
Yeah.
It is.
It's kind of a convenient front.
Mm. No,
It is a
I
good
take your
point,
meaning.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly.
So, I think really the thing is, it's not about money, it's about resources. If you really think about it, economics is not money driven. It's resource driven. It's about sequestering resources. And that's a very different conversation. And the funny thing is, we're not getting that translated into our world, which is that, it might be better to have beans than a whole bunch of paper money. And it's not like we haven't experienced something, the Great Depression. We're a time where money flips on its end, but copper does not, silver does not, all the natural resources of the planet, the oil reserves, they still become very valuable no matter what the economy looks like, or no matter how the accordion is played.
Yeah,
This is true.
yeah, absolutely.
So that's where I think one of the most empowering things is like, well, at least you can learn what's in your backyard, and you could at least start to wean yourself off of the dependence of an enormous thing that we're never going to necessarily figure out, but we know that, you know, it's not in our best interest. You know, no one's really got our backs, so to speak, except for each other in our neighborhood and our communities. And really, we need to just disband all this duality that we're stuck in. Are you a Republican or a Democrat? Oh, well, do you like gay people, or do you think gay people have a disease? Like, all these ideas really seem to be magic tricks on us to dualify ourselves, to not be able to have a conscious conversation about how can we work together to have a better situation for all of us.
This is very true. Divide and
Absolutely.
conquer. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And, you know, we talk a lot about community building, you know, building, groups of people who are around you who you can depend on, and trying to change things, you know, locally and to expand that, you know, and to make contact with other groups of people who are doing the same things, you know, this decentralized web of individual activism, you know, so it starts with you and it grows into your community, you know. I think that's how we can build something.
So I kind of like to call it the systematic cottage industry rebuild, which is really to consider step-by-step processes of what it would look like to rebuild a cottage industry, which was based on Earth First principles. Instead of, you know, crazy make money off of everyone, what if it was like, we're going to make all of our products that we need as a community with sensible choices. The more we can do that, I think it looks something like, at this point, you know, start doing community gatherings, potlucks, skill shares, try to make garbage-free potlucks. Then let's figure out how to get some bulk buying. Then maybe we turn some of those bulk products into value-added products and start providing for our communities. And really just kind of starting from scratch again.
Yeah.
It's true. It seems so sensible, you know, but
It does. It's sensible and it's straightforward, and you can start doing it right now. And I don't understand why we aren't all doing it right now.
Well, as self-declared president of the forest, I say let's start.
I completely agree. I know we're getting close to our time. I'd like to talk to you. Why don't you tell us about your website, what you do, how people can get a hold of you if they're interested, and I'm sure they are.
Cool. Well, I have my website is returntonature.us, and on there I have articles about wild foods and things, foraging and things like that. I've also got a YouTube channel which is Return to Nature Skills. That's also the Facebook page that I keep. So I'm just constantly trying to share herbal information and information about plants in people's backyards, and I teach a lot of classes, and I'm always open to teaching classes. Teach about herbalism, fermentation, foraging, whatever we can come up with, really. And basically just travel and teach is the name of the game. And try to get as many fermented and wild plants into people's guts as possible. Because I truly believe that the DNA inside your body recognizes those things in a way that overrides your rational and gets you more into your instinctual. Stephen Buhner calls it the wild redeemer. And so I think as many people eat a dandelion in their front yard is as many sane people there are again on the planet.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
That's a great idea.
Yeah. Oh, Dan, brother, it's been a great conversation. I really enjoyed having you.
Definitely.
That was excellent.
Cool, man.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you guys.
No, all right, fantastic. Everything will be linked in the video, Dan's website, returntonature.us, and hopefully, let's all make it a point to try to get as many herbs in us as possible. Go outside and eat a dandelion. Yeah.
And don't eat the wrong plants. That's the only thing.
Educate yourself a little bit.
Right. Yeah. Of course.
Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Dan.
Thanks again.
Hey, thank you guys. Yeah, take care.